Welcome to the Success Consultancy's Just Great People podcast, the podcast that introduces you to ordinary people who've done extraordinary things. My name is Barry Eustance, and I'd like to introduce you to today's guest. Hi, everybody. It's Barry Eustance here from the Success Consultancy's Just Great People podcast. I'm delighted to introduce today's guest. It's Frank Tsuro from FranklySpeaking. Frank's actually based in South Africa and Zimbabwe. He's speaking to us today from South Africa. Frank's going to tell you about what he does, what FranklySpeaking does, about Toastmasters, about African leadership, about first-generation leaders in Africa and elsewhere. And as always, I'll let Frank lead the discussion and I'll ask questions on your behalf. Frank, welcome to the Just Great People podcast.
Well, thank you for having me, Barry, and good day to everyone watching.
Yeah, Frank, just if you could just give us a little bit of background. You've been consulting for quite a long time. I say quite a long time. Really tell me how you got into it, but B, more importantly, what you're doing now, and perhaps we can work back how it all stacks together in the FranklySpeaking world.
Okay, that's a long story. I do know that I ended up doing what I'm doing now quite accidentally, because growing up, all I ever wanted to be was to be a chartered accountant or a CPA, as some of the world call it. And so from the time I was in high school, I focused a lot on my accounting and my math, and I always tried to get the very good marks. And I wanted to be one of the few people straight out of high school to get a training contract with one of the big four accounting firms. And I was very lucky that straight out of high school, I actually got my dream job of getting a training contract with Ernst & Young. And I started pursuing my articles. However, during that whole period, I also then decided I needed to, some extracurricular activities. I'm not one person to be overly social. I do love watching some football or soccer. And so I found something that I used to do in high school, and I joined an organization called Toastmasters, which is all about improving your confidence in public speaking and the broader communication and leadership. And so as I was part of that organization, one day a friend of mine who knew that I was a member of Toastmasters came to me and said, "Frank, you're a Toastmaster. Please help me with my MBA dissertation presentation." And so literally that was the start of the work that I do today. I didn't know it at the time, but I helped this gentleman. And a couple of days later, he came back to me and it's like, you know how it goes with adult learning. My friends saw my presentation and they loved it, and they need your help too. But because they're not your friends, you've got to charge them. And that's literally how I got involved in helping these people and getting my first paid consulting gig. And so after that whole coaching these MBA students, after a few weeks, one of them came back to me and says, Frank, I cannot make a fool of myself whilst you're around. And so will you help me with my presentations at work? Now, all three were actually CFOs in their organization. And you know how it goes with technical people. It's not always easy for them to express themselves. And I thought, this is something that I could definitely do. And I didn't see it as a burden or extra work. It's something that I enjoyed doing. And so I got paid to do that. And suddenly I started getting more referrals from that group of three people, until a point where I became too busy. I could not sustain my training contract and do this kind of work, and I needed to make a choice. And well, I'm happy that I ended up doing the work that I do now at FranklySpeaking, which we'll talk about as the session goes.
Yeah, that is a fascinating kind of development, isn't it? It's about product market fit. You didn't have a product, but the market came to you. Wonderful. Could you just explain for our esteemed listeners and viewers exactly what Toastmasters does, what the foundation of Toastmasters does, and then how you've built upon that to your current consulting and speaking work.
Okay, so Toastmasters is something that was born as early as 1904 when our founder, Dr. Ralph C. Smedley, was appointed the Director of Education for the YMCA, the Young Men's Christian Association, or the YMCA. Well, I need to get my words right. So what he recognized
I
as,
think the M goes like that, doesn't it? I think that's
yes, yes, I'm like that. Oh, thank
yeah,
you.
the M likes it. That's right.
Well, it's still early in the morning. I'll get my moves right. So what
Yeah, exactly.
he
And so it's afterwards.
absolutely. So what he recognized was that the young men in the organization were super talented, but they lacked confidence to express themselves fully each time they went out for outreach programs. And so as the director of education, he came up with a solution where, as they came together to debrief on the day, they would sit together once in a while around a table and actually practice the presentations they needed to make in the community and give each other feedback. And this is kind of how the model of Toastmasters began. But it wasn't until 20 years later that we had the first continuous public speaking club, or Toastmasters club as we know it, go on continuously uninterrupted. Between 1904 and 1924, we had clubs that were existent, but some of them would die, and there was a point where there would be no Toastmasters at all. But since 1924, we've had continuous Toastmasters somewhere in the world, and now we are in more than 148 countries across the world. And this year, actually, we celebrated 100 years of continuous Toastmasters. And so,
Wow.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
an organization that has helped a lot of young men and women, a lot of adults or mature people actually improve their confidence in public speaking. But as time went by, and just as the evolution I was talking about in my business and any other business, what we began to find as an organization is that lots of people, when asked what they got from Toastmasters, most of them felt that it was more than just public speaking. In fact, most people said they developed a sense of confidence. And so in looking at that, we actually discovered that the Toastmasters does a lot to improve a lot of your interpersonal communication skills that you need, because of the volunteer nature of the organization. You get opportunities to lead, to influence volunteers who are not paid to do what they do. How do you come up with incentives? How do you motivate people who are not paid to do what they do? How do you resolve conflicts that come from dealing with diverse people, sometimes without any prior academic qualification? And so as a result of those interpersonal communication skills that you develop, interpersonal communication is the language of leadership. It's how you learn to interact with other people. So we've become known as the organization where leaders are made. And that is what we are all about. So if you're struggling with expressing yourself, whether it's in a public speech or in a meeting room, Toastmasters is the place where you can come. Or if you are an emerging professional and want a place where you can develop confidence in leading a team and knowing what to do, that Toastmasters has a lot of mid-career and mature professionals around to help you through our mentorship program, develop that confidence to become the leader that you want to be.
Wow, I mean, that's an amazing story. And I guess, isn't it something that people fear public speaking as much as they fear death? Is that right? Or is second only to death? There's some statistic I heard, I think, from a keynote speaker.
Well, there is that myth flying around, and maybe it's not a myth. I think there are some statistics to suggest that, one of the biggest fears that people have is public speaking. And so the joke or the myth that I know about that is they say at a funeral, people would rather be the dead person in the coffin than the person eulogizing the person that's actually died. And that's how much the fear of public speaking is in itself.
And why do you think that? I mean, Frank, you've been around the Toastmasters environment for a very long time. Why do you think that is? I mean, it's an interesting dynamic, isn't it? Where you can get people who are actually very loquacious and very sociable, and then you put them on a lectern, and suddenly they go into full blown panic attack. Why is that? And how do you get over that in Toastmasters?
Well, I do think that maybe in our day-to-day lives, when in fact you lead through your speeches, and I think when you start giving public speeches, maybe you feel like you're exposed or you're vulnerable to the audience. And so there are a number of psychological factors that may come into play that make you believe that the audience is out there to judge you. And most of the times when I've worked with people who are afraid of public speaking, you find that there are many stories that are not necessarily true that they tell themselves. One of them is, oh, maybe the audience are going to hate me from the upfront. And if I were to ask you, Barry, when was the last time you sat in an audience and were listening or were about to listen to a speaker and wish that that speaker was not effective? Do you remember a time when you were like that?
I don't. I can't remember a time sitting there thinking those thoughts. And I guess that's your point, isn't it? That people don't generally sit there and judge.
Yeah, you're one of the good ones, Barry, but I encourage our viewers, ask yourself, when was the last time that I sat and I wanted a speaker to fail? Actually, what most of us want is for the speaker to succeed and give us something of value, not to waste our time. That's what the audience wants. But for some reason, in our minds, we think that from the from upfront, the audience wants us to fail, which is not true. And so you need to reverse some of those feelings and thinking and say, actually, the audience wants me to succeed. Unless you know that you've got enemies in the audience, then in itself, you can then prepare for that mentally, knowing that there are people you want to fail. But also something we can learn from sales, right? If you know that there are people who are going to want you to fail, and this also goes by extension to the next point around preparation. Salespeople a good salesperson will always anticipate objections. So doing your research on the audience and knowing what it is that they like and don't like and speaking to it becomes one of the biggest things. So the one big rule in public speaking is know your audience. And one of the reasons why people are actually nervous when they speak to audiences is because they do not really know who they're speaking to. I may know that I'm speaking to Barry, but if I don't take time to understand what's Barry's interest in the conversation I'm about to have, what does he know already that I may not need to harp on? What is it? How is it that I can fill that gap that he needs to know? What perspective can I give Barry on the subject? That's when you become more confident because now you know what your place is in that environment and what message you can deliver that can be of value to the audience. So a lot of times when we say we're teaching public speaking, it's not necessarily that we adjust your tone, your body language, and all of this. It's really getting to know who am I speaking to. If you're speaking to an audience that's less technical than yourself, it's important to come down to that audience's level. Otherwise, those people are going to be stressed, having to look for a dictionary and keep up with your fast speaking pace to understand, and that's stressful. Or if that audience is at a higher level, maybe what you need to understand is, okay, why would the CEO of a company ask me as a floor manager to come and speak to them when they probably know the company better? Well, the thing is, the CEO can't afford to know everything that happens on the floor every day, and that's probably why they've hired you. So when you come there, there's some perspective you can give the CEO from the floor that helps you do that. And I always say confidence comes from knowing what to do, when to do it, how to do it, and maybe we could keep going with that flow. So when we say you're preparing yourself for a public speech, and preparing yourself to be a better public speaker, knowing your audience and knowing how to approach them, when to bring up certain things, what not to bring up, depending on their sensitivities. That is what helps you overcome that fear and have that confidence that you can hold on that things were going to be okay.
And it's, I guess, what you just described, which is fantastic. I mean, dear listener and viewer, you just had a fantastic coaching session from Frank on public speaking. It's the alignment, isn't it? Basically, you're aligning yourself with the organization, with the audience, getting into the audience and communicating. Charlotte Story, who I did a recent podcast with, does exactly this. She does a lot of preparation for people in public speaking. She was saying a lot of people get performance anxiety because they feel that they are the focus, whereas simply the speaker is a conduit through which the information flows to the audience. And she gave some physiological methods that she uses with her candidates and students to overcome that performance stress. But I mean, that what you've just given us there, I think, is really valuable and so applicable to so many people. Is it something, if someone wanted to get involved with the Toastmasters, Frank, how do they do it from a it's a global organization, so at a local level, I guess there must be plenty of Toastmasters organizations out there.
Yeah, the good thing is Toastmasters is not like my public speaking school in high school, where you had to be great at public speaking to be a part of it. So for as long as you're above 18, which is really a technical requirement based on our registration in California, if you're above 18, all you need to do is to go to toastmasters.org. And on the top right corner, you see a bar that says find a club. Put in your work address, your home address, or whatever address where you want to put Toastmasters, and it will give you a Toastmasters club in a radius that you choose. They could be, you may want, for example, I've got 5 or 6 branches of Toastmasters, or clubs as we call them, within a 5-kilometer radius from where I live. Sometimes you may need to drive a little more. I'm also a member of a club where I have to drive more than 30 kilometers too, but I go there because I like the environment that one can do. So go to toastmasters.org and click on find a club. Or for those tech savvy people, you can go to the direct link, toastmasters.org/find a club, and you can enter your address and contact a Toastmasters club near you.
Yeah, perfect. And I'll put a link in the notes to our podcast, Frank. That's and we were discussing, weren't we, that has really been a foundation, and you highlighted earlier, that's been a foundation for the additional work and the consulting work. So it started essentially with Toastmasters and then built up from there as you help people through their own communication journey. And how has that progressed, and where's it taking you?
Well, it's been a long progression. So I'll tell you an interesting. So I told you I was doing speech coaching largely for CFOs, and eventually I started working with a lot of CIOs, chief information officers, and chief technology officers. And initially, I was naive enough to think that these people cared about speeches. So the way I helped them prepare for their presentation was as though they had to enter a speech contest. Yet all they really wanted was to actually be effective in their public, in the way they express themselves. So it took me about 18 months to realize that these people were really hiring me on more of a reputation management exercise. They did not want to make a fool of themselves. And so it was as I started intimately understanding that I started getting opportunities to be more involved in the lives of the leaders that I was working with. And so one of the times someone said to me, Frank, I did not realize there's a method to the madness on how you communicate a message. Have you ever given a go at strategy? And that's how I got involved in business strategy. And you and I, Barry, are part of a strat chat. And I suppose the reason why I'm part of that strat chat is because I used to be involved in a lot of business strategy for either corporate organizations, corporate departments wanting to translate their corporate strategy into a business strategy, or medium-sized businesses looking for a business strategy. But then what then happened over time is I got very busy. I always joke I had 3.5 companies that I was consulting for. The first company that pretty much I was loyal to, and 3 other organizations. And as I found that I was running out of capacity because I remained self-employed, I decided, how can I streamline this? And then I thought maybe instead of working with the entire organization or department, I could work with the leaders. And that's how I transitioned into what someone could call executive coaching. And it was, as you remember, I said I was working with a lot of people from the information or technology office or the finance office, and a few other people from operations and a few CEOs. What then started happening is, as I was doing a lot of executive coaching and providing that strategy support to them, I discovered that actually these people were extremely brilliant at what they do, but they struggled each time you added a breathing creature called a human. And that's when I decided that actually I didn't need to tell those people what to do. They knew that better than I did. All I need to do is help them connect and align with the people that they work with. And that is how I ended up doing the work that I do today, which is mostly in the leadership space. So I work with a lot of leaders, helping them understand how to work with other people. So one of the foundations of Frankly Speaking is I help leaders navigate difficult conversations. So a lot of times I speak at an event, and then a leader comes to me and has a conversation and says, "Oh, Frank, this thing you were talking about was very interesting. You must come and let's have a bigger conversation." Then we have a private meeting, have a conversation. And that leader would most likely say to me, "You know what, Frank? My team needs to hear this. My team, they're actually idiots. You need to talk to them about this." Then I come and then I talk to the team. And when I talk to the team says, "You know what, Frank? Our boss is an idiot. You must talk to him." Most of the idiots are guys. It's when the two groups of people, a leader and his or her direct reports, I think that each one are not understanding them in the best way. I usually get involved in starting to have that difficult conversation. And sometimes it's creating that safety that whatever the direct reports tell me, I'm going to ensure that they're not going to be thrown under the bus or victimized for what they're going to feel. And also making sure, receiving feedback as a superior in an organization is not the easiest thing on your ego. So making sure that whatever is communicated in the best way and does not destroy someone's ego is what I facilitate. And what's fascinating is it may take weeks, but after weeks, when people start to understand that actually, you know what, maybe I was struggling to understand how this person was thinking about this challenge or going up about it, they learn to actually come together and align. And when they do that, they come up with better solutions than I ever gave as a consultant. So I do a lot of work in the frank conversation space, which we can always talk about. I also still do presentation coaching. I don't teach people public speaking. I always say you can go to a Toastmasters club for that. But what I can do is help you prepare for your next high stakes presentation. So if you've got a specific presentation that you need to prepare for, I will help you with the process of preparing for that particular presentation rather than teach you, how to have a structure or how to have body language. That's something that I think you can be better served elsewhere. And I'm also involved now because of where I am in Africa with something called first generation leaders, which is literally the first person in someone's family to ever be in a leadership role. So that's in many ways what I do at the moment and how it's evolved.
And that's, Africa is just such a dynamic environment, isn't it? Where you now have this whole generational thing of leadership coming forward, the first generation leaders. In fact, that's probably one for a podcast on its own, Frank, which we should follow up on. And what I picked up from your difficult conversations discussion was that it can take weeks. It's not one residential workshop somewhere. Incidentally, listeners and readers, my listeners and readers, the bird you can hear chirping is at Frank's end down in South Africa, and it's actually, I think it's rather cute. It's not a problem with your computer. Yeah. So the difficult conversations are not just something you can hammer out in an afternoon workshop over a cup of coffee. It's a long process, isn't it? Or can be. Is that your experience?
Yes, yes. So I always say I never like to identify myself as a speaker, a facilitator, or a coach. I'm quite blessed that because of my involvement in public speaking since I was 7 and my involvement with Toastmasters, I'm quite versatile in how things go. So sometimes people will call me to have a keynote speech and talk about, uh, culture, leadership, frank conversations, first generation leaders. So in an afternoon, the best that I can do when I'm giving a speech or a workshop is build awareness of what could be happening. This podcast is an example of how you can build awareness of something just through a conversation. But the real change takes weeks. They say it takes us on average about 66 days to actually build in a habit. But just the process of two parties are not agreeing with each other, just the party of trying to get buy-in from maybe someone's direct reports to actually tackle a certain issue can be a matter of weeks, because especially if they're in a culture where they do not feel safe to express themselves openly. Or maybe the process of trying to get the leader, maybe the direct reports are okay if that is tackled, but to get the leader to say, you know what, I'm not going to use whatever is shared with me against my team, and I'm going to receive it in the best possible way. That in itself is something that takes weeks. And also getting to understand each other's viewpoints, or getting, into that whole conversation of having each party share how they've been misunderstood for a while. That in itself is a process. So there's a gentleman from Australia called Peter Bromberg who has this, quote that I use a lot in this industry. And he says, when you avoid difficult conversations, you trade short-term discomfort for long-term dysfunction. And so what happens is that those difficult conversations, they are uncomfortable. However, they actually guard against dysfunction. But frankly, sometimes when I get called in, there's already a certain form of dysfunction that is normalized in us. And so to have the open-mindedness to change, it depends on the group you're working with, them, how open-minded are they? And after that, how willing are they to change? Because nothing I can do will ever change you. However, if you're open enough or ready for that change, then that process becomes easier. So, I work with a diverse range of difficult conversations, some which I can solve, some which I can only manage through the process, and some which a decision needs to be made at the end because maybe we can't resolve it.
It's fascinating, Frank, and you've brought together so many threads there. The importance of communication in alignment, the importance of alignment in change, the importance of change and leadership, and the amount of time that takes to actually internalize within the respective parties to the discussion. Fascinating, and it actually gives a real insight into why change has to be so people-centric, so people-focused, how strategy needs to be people-focused, how leadership must be people-focused. And obviously it sounds like it's stating the obvious, but it's a point that's often missed, that we're dealing with people. Frank, this has been fantastic. We need to continue this more, not only about alignment, leadership, first generation leaders in Africa, but the whole conversation about strategy and people. We're getting time limited now. So Frank, will you come back and we can have that additional conversation? What I will do, dear listener and viewer, is I will ensure that Frank's details are on the notes to this podcast. Toastmasters are on the link to the podcast. And of course, Frank is able to provide his coaching and mentoring from anywhere in the world. And Frank has been all over the world. And so I'll make sure that happens. So Frank, just a fantastic insight and great perspective, and a very insightful podcast from my perspective. I think I'm going to run down and join Toastmasters. Mind you, you nudged me about doing that a little while ago. I'll do it. And Frank Tsuro, what can I say, from South Africa and Zimbabwe? What a great contribution to the Just Great People podcast. And you're going to come back soon.
Thank you for having me, Barry. And yeah, thank you for giving me the platform to, make this world a better place. As you know, I've got this dream of impacting 100,000 honest leaders. And I hope through this platform that I can add to that number.
Yeah, and I'm aligned with Frank in that objective. We need honest, ethical leaders, and the world will be a better place. But until next time, Frank Tsuro from FranklySpeaking from South Africa and globally, thank you so much for your insights. Real great pleasure to talk to you, Frank, again.
My pleasure.
Thanks, Frank. And before we go, just a reminder, please do like, do share, and please do subscribe to this podcast and ensure that you pass it on to everybody you know. So that's it for today's Just Great People podcast from the Success Consultancy. We hope and trust you've enjoyed it. Please join us next time, and please do remember to subscribe. Thanks for joining us.